but I'm afraid that we're getting to a place, or I think in Western Europe they might already be there. I think if the last election hadn't turned out the way it did, we might be headed down that road very fast ourselves. But to the point where, you can think what you want, but you can't say what you think. What we used to call critical thinking has been replaced by Marxist critique, critical theory, right? And and this is something I explore in my book a little bit, and I talk to my students about it, and I've actually written a couple of articles about it too. That we've got this huge disconnect in our society.
I'm Dr. Randy Bach, and I'm proud today to have with me Professor Rob Jenkins. I consider him a colleague of sorts. We both write for Brownson.org. Thank you, Jeffrey Tucker. And he's a professor at Georgia State and a writer. He has a book, Think Better, Think Better, Write Better. There you go. The sequel should be Think Betterer.
Betterer. Okay.
Betterer.
I'll make a note of that.
And he's a regular contributor to Minding the Campus, and he's a higher ed fellow at Campus Reform. And I don't know how Ed feels about you're being higher than him, but Campus Reform should be happy to have you. You are, I shouldn't say this. I've had many interesting professors over the years, but you might be the funniest one. I think you're one of the best follows on X.com. I'll put it up here so people can see it right from the get-go or the gecko, either one. Rob Jenkins, prof on the right, pretty much the Babylon Bee. Actually, the Babylon Bee is the essence of why Elon venture to take over X. So it's real value to be able to put pithy thoughts into satire. So Rob, thank you so much. Sorry for the long introduction.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me, Randy. I always enjoy talking to you.
Yeah. Well, it goes vice versa. So I suppose, magician shouldn't reveal his tricks, but how do you do it? Like, you just have kind of a great filter for finding the hilarious inversion of our somewhat sensical, somewhat nonsensical world.
I don't know that I could reveal because I'm not sure myself. I have a very warped mind. That's a good start, I guess. Depending on what you want to do, it's a good place to start. I just have a sort of a quirky way of looking at things. And because I've been in higher ed all my life, counting undergrad and graduate school, 45 years or so, I've been in higher ed, been around higher ed, been around professors and other people in the industry. And I know how they think and how they talk. And pretty much anything that comes up, I can rephrase it in terms that they might use, but I changed just a little bit to make it ridiculous. And often it doesn't take very much because a lot of the times it's ridiculous on its face. But I love Babylon Bee, absolutely. The thing about Babylon Bee, though, is that everybody knows it's satire, which doesn't ruin it. It's still good. It's still funny. Mm-hmm. But I like to try to do it in such a way that people aren't even sure. Now, as I gain more followers, people are sort of catching on. But when I had that one post that went viral, if Putin isn't stopped, all of Europe could succumb to totalitarianism and so forth. And it got just on my page, it got 6.5 million views. And a big account called Wall Street Mav did something a little crappy. Instead of reposting it, they screenshotted it and posted it. Okay, so then they get credit for all the engagement instead of me. Mm-hmm. But they got 22 million views on that, and then Elon reposted he didn't repost me, he reposted the screenshot, and he got another 22 million views. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 million people saw that one post. And first of all, that is just such an amazing testament to the power of this new form of media that we have. I mean, I've been writing for over 30 years. I've written 7 books. I've written literally over 2,000 articles, many of them for very well-read publications like Brownstone and Town Hall and American Thinker, with millions of readers. But I dare say more people read that one post on X than have read everything else I've ever written put together. And maybe that's just an indictment of me as a writer, but I think it has more to do with just the nature of this platform. But when I posted that, it was about 50-50, maybe slightly over, maybe 55% got it, understood that it was satire, and 45% didn't. Now, a lot of people mislabeled it. They said it was sarcasm or parody. And, I guess those are some definitions that have a lot of gray area, a lot of overlap. But, I've always been a fan of satire. I'm a big fan of Jonathan Swift and, Moliere. Mark Twain was an underrated satirist. And, the ability to say something that people at first take seriously, but then they go, oh, wait. And then it really makes them think. I don't claim to be in those guys' class by any means. Ambrose Bierce is another one.
I was thinking Ambrose Bierce as you were saying it. He's one of my favorites. Do you consider H.L. Mencken a satirist?
I mean, he certainly has some satirical writings. Yeah, I don't know that he's primarily a satirist, but he can be very satirical. And I don't know that I'm primarily a satirist. I mean, in all of my writings outside of X, I'm not. And if people were to pick up Think Better, Write Better, or my children's book Jennifer's Monster, they probably, because they encounter me on X, they'd probably be really disappointed because Think Better, Write Better. I mean, it has a few kind of one-liners in there because it's written mostly for students. You got to keep them interested, but it's certainly not intended to be a funny book. Now, I did write a funny book. The very first book that I wrote is called Family Man. I've got 4 kids, and at the time they were between the ages of about 2 and 12 when I started writing that book. And I wanted to write a book. I was still coaching basketball at the time. I was still coaching college basketball, but I'd gone to college to become a writer and ended up falling into basketball coaching, which, by the way, I'm working on a book about that right now. So if anybody's interested, and we can come back and talk about that more in a minute if you want. But I wanted to write a book, and I thought, what do I know a lot about? Well, I mean, I know a lot about basketball, but nobody cares. I'm not Dean Smith, so nobody's going to read it. Mm-hmm. I thought, well, I know a lot about family life because I've got a wife and a mortgage and a career and 4 kids. And so I wrote a book about that. And that book is funny. It's snarky, it's satirical, it's a lot of dad jokes, I guess. Mm-hmm. But funny thing is, of course, everybody in my family, bought a copy to support me. And they all put their copies in the bathroom. That's where, if I go to a family member's house, that's where I could find a copy of Family Man. So I'm at my brother's house in the bathroom, and I pick up a copy because there's nothing else to read in there. I pick up a copy of Family Man and just flip through it and start reading my own stuff, and I find myself laughing. So
Well,
if
that's
somebody's
nice.
looking for a funny book, they can get Family Man on Amazon. The other books aren't
I
really
gotta find
funny, so I don't necessarily consider myself a satirist, but on X, that's just sort of come naturally.
Well, so I'm not your agent, and I won't get a cut, unfortunately. But I think there might be a Rob Jenkins on X kind of book, compendium.
What I would like to do, maybe when I finish this book I'm working on now, and then my next project is to do a second edition of a book I did with my friend and colleague Carl Hayden called The 9 Virtues of Exceptional Leaders. We brought that out in 2015, and it's time to update it. So we're gonna work on that this summer. And then my next project is to come out with a third edition of Think Better, Write Better. But then after that, I think I might collect some of these things from X. I've been collecting them, and maybe come out with some kind of updated version of Ambrose Bierce's The Devil's Dictionary.
Oh my God, that's one of my favorites.
Yeah, me too. And I mean, I don't know that I can improve on it, but he died over 100 years ago, and he missed out on a lot of stuff that I'm sure he would like to have commented on if he'd been around. And so maybe I can help out with that.
Yeah. So this is a side task for later, but somewhere along, I mean, I read Devil's Dictionary, and I had this quote in my head, which I've used. My dad was a lawyer, just as a disclaimer, and my brother's a lawyer. My other brother went to law school. My brother-in-law is a judge. So anyway, I wouldn't be here but for attorneys probably, or I would not have been fed. Maybe, who knows? But the line is, it's one of these definitions: attorney or maybe lawyer, a parasite who does not yet realize he is such because no one has yet paid him to do so.
Yeah,
Bierce is great. Once the internet came around, I mean, I went back to my Devil's Dictionary and I couldn't find that one. I don't know where I saw it, and the internet is totally void of this. I mean, I could use it as my own and say that I came up with it, except I didn't. And it's just kind of an oddity. I just don't know where that one popped in from. So whoever wrote that, kudos.
Yeah.
But I just assumed it was Ambrose Bierce for the longest time, and then I tried to attribute it to him, and I can't. So you can use that one.
I may very well steal that.
But it's a great line because people have their price. It's like the old joke: if there were no you fill in your enemy, but say if the Democrats didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any standards at all.
Right.
Which is kind of the essence of my most recent article in Waiting. On the occasion of Mrs. Anthony Fauci, aka Christine Grady's dual offer to go to Alaska or resign her job. So I just did a post on what it means to be the bioethicist wife of Dr. Fauci, who may not really be interested in bioethics. And it's factual. So it's about really more of the Zika episode where there was an ethics panel report that you shouldn't inject people with Zika because lots of reasons. And lo and behold, Fauci went ahead to do everything he could to avoid and ignore that ruling subsequently. So hilarity ensued. And they're actually injecting and infecting women in Baltimore right now with Zika, which is, triply, doubly pointless, aside from the needle, the head of the needle. Anyway, so, it's just kind of, an instructive way of looking at people. It's just like you can't write this stuff up. I mean, you couldn't come up with, the kind of the designer of SARS-CoV-2 and the one who, threw ethics down the toilet. He goes home every day to the chief bioethicist at HHS.
It reminds me of the time during a basketball game when I jumped up and yelled at the referee, "That's a foul." He looked at me and said, "Coach, it's not a foul unless I say it is."
That's nice.
Oh,
that's nice.
Maybe that explains what's going on.
Yeah. It's kind of the, there's a fair amount of the emperor's new clothes that are out there that everyone just kind of gets along to go along, whatever. And that's what it is. But I like that line by the coach. By the ref.
Yeah.
I think we actually need referees. I mean, when I wrote my Zika book, at the end, kind of thing still kind of puzzling around in my head was like, okay, so there's a panic, and is it a pandemic? There should be like some tribunal to figure out whether all the science merited it. And at the time I was writing, I think it was like the Johnny Depp, or maybe it was a little before that, but when I was talking about it, it's like the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial came along, and everyone has an opinion on that. Everyone, I think pretty much people, they didn't like Johnny Depp's attitude and behavior, but they liked it better than they like hers. And they came up with a decision. But if we had that kind of interest in pandemics, we might be able to like have a better society. All you need to do is like have some prurient aspect of COVID and or whatever, and then people would actually start to care about the actual data. I don't know how to do it.
On the other hand, you got to be careful with the referees who you select. I said to that same referee after the game, I went up to him. I said, Bob, do you know why they don't have basketball in heaven? He said, no, coach, why not? I said, no referees.
That's an attorney joke also, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's funny. No. Yeah, it's like I think God's like the devil and God or whatever getting together. It's, I'm going to sue you. It's like that's not going to happen. I got all the
lawyers. Yeah.
Yeah. So how does this play out on campus? And what is camp? I mean, are you on campus much? And what is campus like these days? I am married to a professor, and so I'm going to keep all my opinions quiet. So I want to hear yours.
Well, in many ways, I'm kind of out of the fray on campus. I teach at a suburban branch campus of Georgia State up in the very affluent, very nice suburb of Alpharetta, which is nice for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that I don't have to drive downtown. I only go to campus 2 days a week. I teach a couple of classes on campus, and I teach a couple of classes online, which is another subject that we can talk about at some point if you want. But the bottom line is I don't have to go to campus every day. I used to be right, for many years I was right in the thick of things. I was a department chair. I was a dean. I chaired many of the big committees. I was just at a meeting, but right before this, a meeting of the English Executive Committee. And I don't know that anyone who's currently on that committee knows that I'm the one who started the English Executive Committee back in 2001. But, for many years I was very involved. And I wasn't particularly vocal politically. And it wasn't necessarily because I was afraid to, or I was, afraid I'd lose my job or whatever. I was just busy with other stuff. I was raising a family, and I had a lot of work to do. But then I started writing for various outlets, and I wrote something that was kind of controversial. It was about a local issue, a local political issue. Not necessarily a partisan political issue, but very, very controversial locally. And the president called me in. I was a dean at the time, and he said, Rob, you can't say this sort of thing if you're a dean. And I thought to myself, that's fair. You're right. I represent the university. But the other thing I thought was, well, maybe I don't want to be a dean anymore then. Mm-hmm. Maybe I would rather be able to say these kinds of things when I want to and not have to worry about it. So right. It took me a few years to figure out an exit strategy, but that was kind of where it started. I'm very fortunate to work in a red state of Georgia. People think Georgia is a purple state because we have 2 Democrat senators. I personally think that was kind of a fluke. Mm-hmm. We've had a long string of Republican governors. Our state legislature is tilted, about 60-40 Republican. The current chancellor of our university system is a former Republican government, Sonny Perdue. So, and to be completely fair, Georgia State, I get all the emails about, the DEI stuff. And of course, we're already one of the most diverse universities in the country. And when I see an email about, pushing DEI, I'm like, so, what are you planning to do? Go up to Pickens County and try to recruit some white students? I mean, what does DEI even mean at Georgia State? but they don't push it. I haven't been required to attend any, they offer some, webinars and stuff, but we're not required to attend. Our president seems to be a very progressive guy, and I don't mean progressive with a capital P. I mean very forward-looking. Seems to really have the best interests of the university at heart. Last spring, during graduation, and I confess I wasn't there, I was out of town, but apparently a student, who was graduating grabbed the microphone and started shouting pro-Palestinian propaganda, and they escorted her from the building. And then the president put out an email saying, look, I respect all of your opinions, but you can't do that at graduation. And I thought, you know what, good for you, man. Good for you. So people ask me this all the time when they see the things that I write for Brownstone or for campus reform or minding the campus or town hall. They're like, man, how can you get away with saying that stuff? And the honest to goodness truth is I've never really had any issues except for two. The one I mentioned where the president called me in and said, you can't say that. But he didn't punish me. He just said, you got to be careful. A few years after that, a different president actually tried to get rid of me, tried to fire me, he and a small group of other administrators and faculty, because I had written something. Again, it wasn't particularly political, certainly not partisan politics, but I had written something for the Chronicle of Higher Education that they perceived as being critical of online education. And at the time, the president was really, really pushing our online program and trying to grow it. And the funny thing, the irony is it wasn't really critical. It just, it said, hey, online has a tremendous upside, but it's failing too many students. And we need to re-examine this. Maybe it's because we're letting students take online classes who have no business taking online classes because it requires a greater degree of self-discipline than on-campus classes. So for some students, they're great. And frankly, some courses translate better online than others. But instead of having this approach where we just do everything online and try to push as many students as possible, maybe we should take a step back and be a little bit more measured in our approach. But boy, it pissed off the president at the time. And he came after me with a vengeance and spent 2 years trying to get rid of me. He couldn't because I had tenure and I hadn't actually done anything wrong. But he was able to make my life fairly miserable for a couple of years.
That's interesting.
And then he ended up getting fired for some other things, but and I'm still here. But anyway, so I mean, other than those two events, I haven't really had any problems. Now, every day I open my email and I half expect to see something from the provost, taking me to task for whatever I've written lately, but it hasn't happened. I just got awarded a semi-sabbatical next year. Those are fairly competitive. So I guess if they hated me and wanted to run me off, they wouldn't be doing that. So like I said, I'm very fortunate to be where I am. I think if I were at a lot of other institutions, I wouldn't have the freedom that I do. And I'm grateful for it.
Yeah. As you're talking, I think it's unavoidable to kind of put your mental Rolodex up and see where that interact in one's own circumstances. And I just thought of two instances, like I don't really have any fear about writing stuff. Maybe I should, but I was thinking, where do you get the strength for that? I was thinking, I brought this up a few times, and I usually get a little emotional when I bring it up. I'm going to try not to, but when I was 13, I was going to be bar mitzvah. Actually, 14. My parents didn't have the money the year I was 13 to get bar mitzvah. And so I was 14. So I was an old bar mitzvah. And it was the first year that the rabbi said, we want you to have we're not Orthodox, we were Reformed. It's kind of like the Episcopal branch. And, so give a speech about the bar mitzvah. So I just thought, here I am 13/14. And bar mitzvah historically, as a tribal society, you're going to, go out and be a shepherd in the field or whatever, kind of take the role of manhood, but that doesn't really accrue in ours. And so I thought either I didn't really want to do more Hebrew school, but either you kind of make the age society appropriate, maybe it's 16 or 18 or 15, whatever, where you're actually getting your driver's permit or license, or voting or whatever, or you give us some more responsibilities in the context of being 13. I wasn't really aware of the minion aspect, and that's a side note. Anyway, so I wrote the speech up. I got up and in the prep the week before, and the rabbi got up and screamed at me, like, that is not appropriate. And maybe he was right. I don't know if he's right or wrong, but he said, I'm not supervising the bar mitzvah. Get rid of that speech. So I got home and my dad said, well, what do you want to do? And what do I want to do? What do you want to do? It's like, it was a week before the bar mitzvah. He said, well, we'll go somewhere else. We'll postpone it. We'll get a different rabbi if you want to really do it, or you can change it. I said, well, I don't think it was objectionable. And it was like a page and a half. It was nothing, enormously insightful. So we got it. So the assistant rabbi went and did it. He actually wound up marrying me and my wife much later. And so we formed a bond over that. But kind of like my father's ability to, back up my words. And he, as I mentioned, is an attorney, and I suppose words are important. He wound up being like the secretary for all these groups, like a lodge and whatnot. He joined, or the PTA or whatever it was. He wound up being the secretary of those things. So he was a word kind of guy. Did the crosswords and whatnot. And, he said your words are your thoughts. Those are important to you. Absolutely. And that's what defined you. And it's kind of like, that was maybe, wound me up and set me off to the successes and failures. And so, I pretty much got caught up in my words as a medical doctor because I wrote a book about narcotic de-addiction, getting off narcotics, which, I didn't see narcotic addiction as a disease. I think is like kind of a trauma, mental trauma, if you want. And traumas like breaking your hip can be serious and deadly, but they're not diseases. Anyway, so my words were used against me when a narcotic addict complained for other reasons, and then the board went after me for my words. And so my words and thoughts, for better or for worse, but so fast forward to COVID, I could say what I wanted to because I had been temporarily suspended, and I wound up working medicine again, but I'm really on the periphery. So I don't have a huge medical stake like I did when I was practicing. And I'm wondering, if I would have had the same, outlook to be able to be the boy in the emperor's new clothes and right. Point out this and that if I had, young kids at the time and whatnot. So there's a little bit of freedom. I don't remember what Janis Joplin said, but, basically, you have the freedom at a certain point when your kids are out on their own, they're making their own money, they're taxpayers, and you can kind of say and do what you want. So it's an interesting phenomenon. But at the end of the day, to coin a phrase, your words define you, and they right. are also going to be the direction and the compass and pointing out for the younger people who don't have that freedom to do that. So I think the words are really important. Kind of the pithiness of X posting. In your case, ex post factos, you have like reasonable facts about them are I guess kind of premonitory and helpful towards the people who don't necessarily have that liberty within the profession, professoring or medicine or whatever.
Well, and that's one of the things I'm very mindful of. And like you, I wonder if I lived in California or New York, not that I would ever live in any of those places, but if I lived in a state that was blue or even purple, where I was legitimately risking my livelihood by saying the things that I say, I wonder if I would have the courage to do it. And I hope that I would, but I don't know that for a fact. And so one of the things that I try to do is to speak for all of those professors and other parts of the country and other institutions who can't speak up. And I get emails and DMs all the time from people saying, thank you for saying that. I wish I could say that.
Yeah, that's funny.
And that's very it's very gratifying to me, because that's part of what I'm doing. I'm trying to speak for them. But you're absolutely right about words, about thoughts. That's kind of the premise of my book, Think Better, Write Better. If you're trying to teach students to write, the first step is to teach them to think, and then put that into writing. But I'm afraid that we're getting to a place, or I think in Western Europe they might already be there. I think if if the last election hadn't turned out the way it did, we might be headed down that road very fast ourselves. But to the point where, you know, you can think what you want, but you can't say what you think. Well, if you can't say what you think, then you really can't think what you want. Controlling people's words is a way of controlling their thoughts. And that's one of the things that I'm really trying to push back against in every way that I can.
Yeah, no, you make an excellent point there about Europe and about words and about where we were and the tipping scale. And notwithstanding your funny post about a judge, you know, remanding Kamala Harris back to her job, we're not there. And her pre-incarnation, Hillary, you know, she was defending people's right to worship. So this is kind of the same parsing and the distinction between words, you know, that you could do the thinking part, like as Catholics in communist Poland might have been able to go worship. So she was preserving the right to worship, but acting on those things as Solidarność
That's right.
wound up doing and making actionable changes in the government. That's to mix languages, metaphors, that's verboten. And so, you know, it's really important that they offer you something, but unless you look really carefully, you know, check the ingredients on the box, you know, you're not getting the thing you think. Freedom of religion and freedom of speech are not necessarily the abilities to, you know, sit there and think about it. You know, there's a joke, you know, about Clark Kent. You know, there's a mystery at the Daily Planet why all the women were getting young, you know, early age breast cancer. You know.
Okay.
You know,
I get it.
So that's Clark Kent thinking, you know, too hard.
Yeah.
So thinking and acting is different. You know, whether he gets Lois Lane, that's a totally different thing. You have to kind of put yourself out there and get back to my narcotic treatment days. You know, well, I'll pass on that one, but you know, I just think it's important to kind of you know, refine and define the words, and I think that's, you know, I think English majors get denigrated a little bit as not being effective. I mean, their STEM and all the things that people can do. What's the role of English as a major, and do people need kind of to study English in order to be definitional thinkers?
You know, that's a tough one because the English major isn't what it used to be. They're fast, you know, getting rid of the canon, the Western canon, as quickly as they can, especially the more prestigious elite institutions, taking down pictures of Shakespeare and refusing to teach him, and so it's not what it used to be. What we used to call critical thinking has been replaced by Marxist critique, you know, critical theory, right? And you know, and this is something I explore in my book a little bit, and I talk to my students about it, and I've actually written a couple of articles about it too. That we've got this huge disconnect in our society. The universities claim, in fact, they shout from the rooftops that they teach critical thinking. They talk about it all the time. And yet, when you survey employers, and I mean survey after survey after survey, I cite several of them in the book, and there are 2 or 3 that have come out just since I published the last edition of the book a couple of years ago. They ask employers, where are your new hires most efficient? And the number 1 and number 2 answers in some order are always they can't write and they can't think. And those are always the number 1 and number 2 answers. So, you know, you've got the university saying we're teaching critical thinking, and then you've got the end users, the people hiring their graduates, saying, no, you're not, because they can't do it. So are the universities just lying? Or is what they call critical thinking different from what the employers mean when they say critical thinking? I think that's it.
Right.
Employers want people to be able to use logic and reason to solve problems. I mean, that's what critical thinking has always meant. But the universities mean Marxist critical theory, and yeah,
Right.
they're teaching that.
It's right. It's good critical thinking if you wound up at the predetermined, predestined ordination of our thoughts,
Right.
and you confirm us,
Right.
and then we will confirm you, and we'll confer upon you a degree because you have shown the appropriate aping, rapiding, mirroring techniques.
Right.
Or parroting.
Well, you know,
I don't know where I got rabbit, parrot.
the dominant theory in English departments these days is deconstructionism, and it just goes back to Marx. Basically, tearing down everything that's ever existed. Which, and that might be a place to start sometimes, because sometimes things are bad and they don't work, and we need to tear them down. But in that line of thinking, I don't see anything positive. I don't see anything being built. The theory is we're gonna tear down all of these unjust structures, and then from their ashes is going to arise this great just polity, and all I see is the destruction and nothing positive coming from it.
I mean, I actually think they might have a case if they would include Marxism in all the things they're going to destroy.
Burn it down too. But so it's like students are being taught the first part, which is question what exists. Okay, yeah, good. All right. But that doesn't mean that everything that exists is bad. Some of it is, but not all of it is, and you have to be able to discern. And if you do discern that something isn't right, then how do we fix it in a way that benefits people? And that's what critical thinking is, and that's what employers want employees to be able to do. Here's this thing we're doing in our department, this accounting procedure, and it's not working. So, okay, how do we fix it so that it works? That's problem solving. So most universities aren't teaching critical thinking anymore.
Right.
English departments used to be a place where people could go to learn critical thinking, because you spend a lot of time reading other people's words and trying to figure out what the heck they're talking about, and what it all means. And the underlying assumption was always that it means something if we can just get at it. And here are some tools for doing that. That's the way I was trained. But now the underlying assumption is it doesn't mean anything, or it means whatever you want it to mean. And so, what's the point? I mean, I wouldn't major in English today. And I have a son who just got his PhD in marketing. When he was an undergraduate, he wanted to major in English. And I was like, what I hear you saying is that we just need to go ahead and finish out the basement now. But, I said, you need to find a field where you can use all of that creativity. And, he is good with words. He's a good storyteller, to, actually make a living and do something that people are interested in, and that won't turn you into a little Maoist foot soldier. Right. And so he did, and he's done very, very well. He just, I don't want to out him, so I'm not going to say his name or what institution.
He might have your last name, but we'll leave that.
Yeah. So he's just starting his career, so I don't want to put any black.
Fortunately, you have the cloud. You have kind of the reverse internet effect. I forget exactly. I don't know how to phrase this, but the odd names are easier to pick out. Like if you're Ted Kaczynski's brother, it's like I could probably find that guy tomorrow.
Right.
I don't remember what his first name was, but let's say, I don't know, let's say his name Ed or Jim or whatever. I don't know. I don't need to know. I'll be able to find that guy and probably find his home address. But Smith, Jenkins, not so much. Really hard. I passed this house yesterday in Newton, and it had these weird signs out front. They were, I don't know if you can call it racist, if it's like reverse racist, but it's calling out the new head of the Joint Chief Army Armed Forces Chief of Staff, and basically calling him white MAGA. And because I guess the previous guy was not white, whatever, and got fired. He's an Obama hire, whatever, and or Biden, whatever. But it's like, so I looked the guy up, but his last name is like that, Smith. It's like I have no idea how to really pursue it further. I wasn't going to do anything. I just was curious, like, who is this person? But you can't find out. But if his name had been, I don't know, O. Smithenstein, it would have been easier. But while you were talking, your history in basketball, I follow sports fair amount, and I tape the games, and so I kind of watch them condensed and whatnot. But I follow the Celtics and the Patriots and other teams here and there. But I was thinking, how interesting would it be if you could get all the critical theory people to run basketball teams, and try to populate their teams with players based on not merit,
based on their theories.
Well, or about who you want to be based on their looks, based on diversity, and have the game, deconstruct the game. Everyone goes into some type of defense. Why should you be on the defensive end when the other team wants to score? Shouldn't they have the right to score? Maybe you should do interpretive dance. It would just be, I don't know, kind of an interesting play. And even amongst them, there are some people who root for teams, and they never want their teams to follow any of their dictates.
Of course not. And if you made a rule that every NBA team has to have one disabled player on the court at all time, they would be fighting each other tooth and nail to get the best possible disabled player. I mean, it's just, why should only tall, jumpy people be able to dunk? I don't see why there's not a ramp. Right?
Or what they do for Lucky the mascot, they have a trampoline at halftime.
Yeah,
he's got a trampoline. He can dunk. He's like 5'5", aerobic, acrobatic kind of guy, and he gets a trampoline out there. He does a flip and dunks. Now he can't do that without the trampoline. So maybe the trampoline should be on the court. Maybe the whole court should be a trampoline.
Or young people. I mean, I used to be one of those tall, jumpy people, but it's been 30 years since I've been able to dunk a basketball, and it's that's not fair. It causes me
that's
deep personal pain.
Yeah, it's been more than 30 years. How about never? I've had dreams where I could kind of like do that. Whatever that movie with Michael Jordan was, the cartoony movie.
Space Jam.
Space Jam, where you can kind of fly up. I literally have had dreams like that, and for some reason it doesn't happen to exist. Sadness. So, can we get affirmative action for writing? So if somebody writes poorly, I don't know, is there some kind of aid for that? I mean, I suppose.
Well, I think my book would be a good start, although because it's a textbook, it's a little pricey. But as I mentioned, I'm going to be working next year on a new edition of it, and after that, I think I'll be able to sell the second edition as a trade paperback. I'm working on that so people could actually afford it. But I do think it would help. I mean, obviously, I have a vested interest in saying that. If people just want to write better, a really good place to start is with reading. Reading good writers. There are a lot of really good nonfiction writers out there, and you can read and pick up from them. Malcolm Gladwell is one of my favorites. I like his subject matter, but just the way he writes, reading Malcolm Gladwell to me is like watching Michael Jordan play basketball. It looks so completely effortless, but it's not. A lot of work and effort and training went into it. But you can pick up lots of good habits from reading people like that. I do think it's important. I know sort of the prevailing wisdom today is because of AI. You got Chat GPT. You don't have to be able to write well anymore. But my experience is that Chat GPT really doesn't write all that well. You can generally tell it's a robot. And I think there are places, for that. I have a son who's an investment banker, and you would think if you're an investment banker, you spend all your time working with numbers. He spends almost all of his time writing reports.
Mm-hmm.
and many of them are very formulaic, and so he can use Chat GPT to help generate those. But a big reason for that is that he's also a good writer, and he knows how to give prompts, and then he can go back through and turn it into something that's actually readable prose. So I think there's still a place for people who can write well. I think it's an advantage for people in pretty much any field to be able to write well. I think it will help them to stand out in their field. And just like I talk about the relationship between thinking and writing. It's true that in order to write well, you have to think well, but there's also something about writing that helps you to think. There's something about sitting down and putting words on paper, as you know very well. You've got these thoughts in your head, and maybe they're kind of jumbled. Maybe you've got a rough organizational idea. Maybe you've even jotted down some notes, but there's nothing like sitting down in front of the keyboard and starting to write that brings it all into focus, and you can see where you're on the right track and where you're on the wrong track and where you need more information. So writing itself is a form of thinking.
Yeah, no, I agree. One of my friends said that I had the Bach, he used Bach and Socrates, the Bacratic method, where or the Socratic method is kind of a question answer. And I have to say that I have found benefit, with the vocalization of thoughts. I'll give you one anecdote. My older son is also in investment banking, essentially. He's working on a CFA right now. And as a kid, they kept wanting to medicate him for, attention issues and whatnot. And I didn't really think that was apt and helpful. And I think if he had his medication, he would, any success thereafter, he would attribute to the pill, and he always wanted, I think there's an associative aspect. And I found that he was just kind of, he had a lot of energy in him, like his boy.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to sit down.
Being a boy, right?
So we would go for a walk, and I'd say, well, what did the Gettysburg Address mean, or whatever topic was? And he would have lots of thoughts on it. He was not an idiot, but he didn't like sitting down and writing it. And I as Groucho Marx said, I resemble that remark. And it's the same thing. I have a lot of thoughts, but it's hard for me to put the first one down and start and whatnot. Right. And so I had been using Dragon probably 40 years now. And so we would go for a walk, and I have a little handheld. It was not even a smartphone then, just a little handheld. And I'm like, well, what do you think about it? I get his thoughts down. We transcribe it, put it into a document, and then he could start working with it. And then he mixed and matched his thoughts, because they were already there in basically the format of what he had spoken. And then it was just a matter of, setting the order and putting the periods in the right spot, punctuating and whatnot. And that's kind of how I do my writing. When I did the Zika book and other, I've got 2 other books in galleys. My cancer book is going to come out soonish. I had somebody I knew on Facebook, and he literally had and has, unfortunately, recurrence of cancer. And, we just did a discourse. He would have questions, and I would have questions for him, and it's all this stuff. And then each of those kind of became a chapter in the book. So it was like pre-adjudicated of what people want to hear, because that's what he wanted to hear. And the whole effort of explaining, my jumble of thoughts and my, I'm kind of intense sometimes and more sciencey, whatnot. I kind of think more, kind of in these, maybe they're logical algorithms and whatnot, but that doesn't necessarily mesh with what people want to hear when they want to hear it. And so this kind of, but I speak in anecdotes and jokes and whatnot. And so that kind of flavors and tempers the harsh science thing. I mean, a lot of chapters could just be, if I were just writing them scientifically, don't do this, do this, right. That's what you have this, but nobody likes that. Nobody likes to hear that. Nobody likes to be ordered. They kind of want to, climb the scaffolding themselves and see what they see. And so this interaction, this interface between human minds is a process. And that's, I think, what has come out from writing, and that's what writing serves well. And so as far as these LLMs ChatGPT and Grok and whatnot, I find use in them and in continuing the Socratic method, because I'll say some things and then it's like, this is what would be a formulation of it. And then I wind up picking at it. Like, I think I'm a better editor than, creative writer per se, but that includes editing my own thoughts. And then it can become
absolutely.
something.
I'm a better editor than I am a writer. So for me, the stress is getting a first draft down.
Right.
And once I have a first draft, I'm like, okay,
right.
Now I know what to do. Yeah, I can work with this.
Yeah, it's like first date, 18th date. The first date, I think, is the hardest. The 18th date, if there is one, you have a relationship in a sense, and you kind of, understand the workings.
My first drafts are often garbage, and I know when I'm writing that they're garbage, but I've just learned to not worry about it.
Right.
And just get what I'm thinking down on paper, and then I can go back and work with it.
Yeah.
And even when I'm writing a book, I do that chapter by chapter.
Yeah, good stuff. So we're kind of rounding out our hour. I'm very much appreciative of your time. I don't know. What do you want to end with? Advice to people? Talk about your brownstone writings, your COVID writings, things coming up. You tell us, or what's on the horizon for us.
Well, I do hope that people, if they're on X, if they'll follow me at Prof, short for Professor Prof on the right, or they can just look me up by my name, Rob Jenkins. I do have a new children's book, Jennifer's Monster, that I think a lot of people would probably enjoy. I've had an opportunity to read it at several libraries and schools, and the kids love it. The parents love it. The illustrations are amazing. A young woman, she was a senior in high school when she started working on this. I discovered her, and she just did an amazing job of bringing the story to life. I've had this story for years, and she just really brought it to life. And I plan to write some more children's books in the future. And I'm working right now on a memoir of my coaching years. The title of that is Shooting After Practice. Do you have time for me to tell you a quick anecdote where that title came from?
Yeah.
So my last year as a coach, and this is it's not a coincidence, this was my last year. We were ranked second in the nation in our division. We had a chance to win a national championship. This wasn't big time Division I, it was small college, but still, we were a good team. We had a chance to win a national championship, but we had to win our region first. And we were the number one team in the region, had a good chance to win. But the night before we left for the region tournament, I got a call from my team captain informing me that our star player, 6'7", 23 points, 12 rebounds a game, had just accidentally shot himself in the leg. Some kid from the hood had been over at their apartment flashing his gun, and this guy had, let me see that. And he took it and it went off and went right through the meaty part of his leg. So, he was fine ultimately, but we weren't. We ended up losing in the region finals to a team that we'd beaten twice in the regular season. That was deeply disappointing. But when I got back home, the local sports writer hadn't made the trip with us. So he came by, but I had called in the box scores. So he comes by my office and he says, hey, I see, so-and-so didn't play. He wasn't in the box scores. And I'm thinking, this sounds like a scandal in the making, right? So I'm like, yeah, he was injured. I'm hoping he would drop it at that. He goes, oh, really? How did he get injured? I said, well, he hurt his leg. Just praying he would drop it. He goes, really? How did he hurt his leg? I thought really fast. I said, oh, he was just shooting after practice. So that I lead the book with that anecdote, and that became the title of the book, and it really kind of sums up my years of coaching in many ways. So that should be out this summer. I hope people will check it out, and meanwhile, check me out on X and follow me, and maybe I can continue to make an impact there. But I really appreciate the opportunity to be on, and have this conversation with you. I'll always enjoy talking with you, Randy, and
I appreciate that.
appreciate you and appreciate your audience.
Thank you so much. If people want to help support my podcast, they can go buy my book. It's even better if they read it. It's also on Amazon, Overturning Zika, the Pandemic That Never Was. One of my favorite basketball books. I just give a shout out to the late and great Tommy Heinsohn, who wrote Give Him the Hook. Just that guy, I don't know if you ever listened to him, but he basically made the Basketball Hall of Fame as a player and as a coach, as an announcer, all three. He won championships, as at least one as a coach, and many as kind of part of the iconic Bill Russell, Bob Cousy era Celtics, and hilarious guy, and also an fine painter. So a little bit
know that. But I remember Heinsohn. I became a basketball fan at 10 or 11 years old, watching his teams with Dave Cowens and John Havlicek and JoJo White. That's when I first became a lover of the game.
Yeah, great stuff. Well, thank you so much, Rob. Appreciate Professor Jenkins to me and to everybody else. Professor on the Right on X. Thank you so much for being on.